My name is Carolyn Miller. Today is April 17th, 2018. The time is 6:25 p.m. and we are at St. John's Northwestern Military Academy. I'm interviewing John C. Jadel, who was born on March 21st, 1930 in Toledo, Ohio, and served in the Korean War between 1952 and 1954. John was a first lieutenant in the Army and served in the field artillery. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. So, John, is it okay for during the interview if I call you Jack?
Certainly is.
So, can you tell me why you were interested in pursuing a service job?
Because of the background that you have, with all the various activities you have.
For being in the service in the war?
Yes, I guess so.
Were you worried about serving during the war, or were you more confident in being there?
I didn't get your question, I'm sorry.
Were you nervous, or how did you feel when you found out that you would be serving?
Oh, I was quite okay on it, yes.
And did you communicate with your family back home?
Well, they knew that I'd gone into the ROTC program when I was at Bowling Green State University. So they going through that, putting me in a position where I would get a second lieutenant's assignment when I finished college.
And after you finished, when you actually did go to Korea, what was your experience like there with like the people, the culture?
Well, I first went into a training program, really, when I was at Bowling Green. I had an ROTC program in the Army. And then when I came out of the, finished my degree, I became a second lieutenant in the Army. And I went to Fort Sill in Oklahoma and went through the Fort Sill training program for artillery, and then I was assigned to Korea.
How long did it take you to complete your training?
3-4 months, I would say, when I was on the artillery. 3-4 months.
And then when you finally did get to Korea, you were at the front line, right? You were on the demilitarized zone?
I'm sorry.
The 38th parallel, that's where you were? Where you were
Well,
stationed?
when I first went over, I was in the 38th parallel, yes. But the war had ended. But what they do with second lieutenants, in many cases, in the artillery, is put them on the front line to call in the weapons that are back behind. So that's what they do.
And you started then as a second lieutenant. How long until you became a first lieutenant?
I think it took about 1.5 years.
And for that 1.5 years, you were mainly at the 38th parallel? Or what
No,
else did you do?
I was only at the 38th parallel for only 4 or 5 months, and then I moved back to the unit itself, which was a 2nd Division unit. And I became battery commander for the 2nd Division of artillery.
How many other men did you work closely with?
How many?
Other men did you work closely with?
Well, I had 45 men under my command, and then that was one battery. And there were 3 batteries in the battalion, and so there were 3 times 45, or about 150 people, including the people in the front.
Did you have any conflict or issues trying to keep in control of that many men?
No, they were well behaved, and they did a good job. We had to keep them busy, really, because the war had ended, and then we had to keep them busy in any activities.
Well, what did you do to keep busy?
Well, we had a variety of different tests and different activities that we could use, and most of them had to do with Army activities.
Like training?
Training are very good. Yes, they had been to training schools, the ones that I had.
Was it, how much time did you spend like outside? I think you said you lived in a tent for a while, didn't you?
I did what?
You lived in a tent for a while?
Oh, I lived in a tent while I was over there, yes. Our battery was put up in a small valley, and we had tents for the men and tents for others. We had a place where you had your daily a bit of food, so we had places to do work with men and keep them in good training.
How many men would be in one tent?
Pardon?
How many men would be in one tent?
Well, we would have a battery. That's 2 guns, and there were 6 guns in the battalion, and so we'd have 3 times 45 on the front, and then we'd have men also in the commanding officers.
So if you had about 150 men under you,
No, I had 45 when I first was 45.
and then later it was 150?
No, I was shipped back to home before that happened, because the war had ended and there was an early release program then at the end of the early war, and I was trying to go back to graduate school at Indiana, and so I had applied for early release, and so I was able to get out early, and I was out 2 or 3 months early from my 2-year stint.
Did many other men get to do the early
Oh
release?
yes, they did. A lot of them did. A lot of them did.
And like when you were able to come back home, how was it adjusting back to normal life?
Well, I was going to school, so I went off to Indiana University, is what I did. My daughter had been born while I was in Korea, so I had to get a chance to get acquainted with my daughter. And my wife was there.
How long had it been since she had been born till you had seen her?
Well, she was actually, she was born during the time I was in Korea. And so when I got home, I had a nice new daughter.
Oh.
Yes.
And communicating with your wife, how was that when you were actually overseas?
Well, just fine, because we had a lot of love for each other, and we were great to see each other, and we had a wonderful marriage.
Did you write often, like every day? Or?
Yeah, well, not every day, but I tried to do it every week if I could.
And I see behind you, you have your uniform, and I think you showed it to me before. I think you brought it last time, but I was curious. What are the medals on the side?
I don't know the names of all of those now. My son just did a survey on those, so he's got all the names on those various different pins that are on there. I kept my uniform when I was out of the Army.
How many uniforms did you have?
How many what?
Is that the only uniform you had?
Well, toward the end of my career, yes. When I was up on the front line, I wore a different uniform.
And I'm assuming you don't have that one anymore?
No, just one uniform is all I have.
Oh, okay. And when you were away, when you were overseas, how was it with, other than the culture, like what about food or like normal life? Was it ever boring or was it more complicated than that?
Well, it was very easy when I came out of the Army. It was very simple. Although when I got to Denver, Colorado, where I was being discharged from, the sergeant pulled out the paperwork and gave it back to me and said, "That's no good." And I said, "How come?" He said, "Well, that's been canceled." And so he had to go for a special report to let me be out of the Army and go back to my family.
So they had mixed up your paperwork?
I really don't know what happened, but all the men who came back at that particular time, that particular account was not allowed for some reason, because there was a state, the unions were, a lot of soldiers were able to communicate, to get off at the end of the Korean War, because the war ended.
Well, for your early release, were you originally intending on doing that, or did you plan that as you were overseas, while you were overseas?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question.
Did you originally plan to do the early release, or did you discover that while you were overseas?
No, I discovered for getting off the. See, I found out that while I was in Korea. Yeah, they announced it over there.
And you wanted to do it because you wanted to pursue your graduate degree, right?
I wanted to finish my degree with Indiana University and get an MBA.
What do you think was your most important contribution that you made while you were in the service?
Running a group of men that were for me for 45, 50 men, and keeping everything in a situation where they were out in the country and living in a tent and ready to go to work as soldiers, and keeping them active was not an easy job.
So you had to be more responsible for them. Was it hard to take that responsibility on, or did you feel ready for it?
But I was a battery commander, so that was fine. That was my job.
And you adapted well to the life. You didn't have a culture shock?
I did. Well, I like living in the outdoors, and so that worked out fine for me.
And just to be clear, where exactly were you before you entered the service?
I was in college, but I was going At the same time I was Bowling Green, I was getting my 4-year degree, and I was studying chemistry as my major. And at the same time, I was taking the ROTC program, the Reserve Officers Training Program, at the same time. So when I finished my degree at Bowling Green, I at the same time got my standard as an officer.
Did anything you learned in college help you while you were overseas?
I'm sorry?
Did something you learned in college help you while you were overseas?
I think the training that I had in the ROTC program certainly helped.
When you came back?
When I came back, yes.
And what was a good example of strong leadership you saw while you were serving in the military?
Oh, I think the men had respect for their position, and I had good sergeants, and they were great people to help. And I was a new young officer, and I found that help certainly very helpful.
And I know that you were in charge of a lot of men, but who else did you look up to? Do you remember in particular?
Oh, we were in a small valley with a small road running through the valley. It was very small, and our weapons were right there with us, and we had a nice big hill in front of us. The front line was about 3 or 4 miles off, and so we were well back from the front line, and we were well protected. So keeping the men active in other areas that would keep them active and healthy was a thing that I had responsibility for. So I tried to do that, tried to keep going.
And did you learn any important life lessons while you were in the service?
Did I work on
Learn any important life lessons?
No, I know I had a big job that I had to do, so I spent most of my time on that.
And what did you take away from it?
Well, I took away some training on how to be an officer in a conflict situation. So I was an artillery officer, so that was a very specialized area.
And I know that the military is obviously very disciplined. Was that, how did you take that back home with you? Was it at all difficult acclimating to
No,
it?
I don't think so, really, because the Army had different rules, and so we worked well together.
And when you were working in teams, did you ever do particular exercises aimed at building teamwork? Or was it more individual, training?
Oh, it was groups of men to get them to do things that would give them physical activities, exercises, give them activities in training, give them activities in various other areas. Because there was a fairly good bit of activity on the unit just to keep all of them in the position they were in.
And when you did have extra idle time, did you ever do anything for fun? What did you do for fun?
Did I do anything with?
What did you do for fun if you had idle time?
I didn't have much idle time. I went to bed, I had a tent, and I got up in the morning and went to work.
And how early would you have to get up on a normal day?
Oh, 7 o'clock, in home life?
In the military.
7 o'clock I think was our usual time of getting up.
And then what would you do? Could you take me through a normal
We
day?
we get an opening thing in the morning, and then we'd work all day long on activities we put together. We planned them so that we had activities every day, and so we gave them a day a week off to do their own personal things, and so it was a very straightforward approach.
And what would you do? What did you do if you had a day off?
What?
What would you do if you had a day off?
I didn't have a day off, really, because there was no place to go. I was in the middle of nowhere, and there was a mountain there and a mountain there.
Was there ever any issue among the men?
No,
conflict with each other?
I don't think so. We had good sergeants, and the plans worked well. They were well behaved.
Did you ever feel homesick?
Well, I felt like I'd like to go back and see my daughter and my wife, but that's certainly that case.
How did the people in Korea, how did they take to having the U.S. military there? What was your experience with
Well, there wasn't any individuals very close to us because the war had been going on there. So the people in Korea had mostly gone away south so there weren't very many people around.
And you were living in the tents outside for a year and a half, right?
But,
You were living like in the tents outside for like
yeah,
a year and a half?
yeah, yeah.
And when you actually were able to come home, how was that different?
Well, my wife and I, before I left, we rented a nice house right just outside of the Fort Sill, and so she had a very nice place to live, and I went back to that home. So it was nice getting home.
And when you were overseas, how was food? I'm curious about that. How was the food?
The food was pretty good. It was pretty good. We had a nice shed that we put up so that the men could all come in and get their meals, and the officers had a room in there as well. And so we had good food on every day. So we did quite well.
You had 3 meals a day there?
Pardon?
Did you have 3 meals a day there?
Well, we had a part of the room, part of the big building that we built right by the tents we had was for enlisted men, and then there was a place for the actual creation of the food, and then there was another place for the officers, and so a smaller place. So that's where I went.
Did you ever have to work to help maintain the camp, like help cook or help clean something? Or was that not your job?
Sure. Yeah, I'm making the plans for it and making sure that it was a good, solid program. Yeah.
So did you do a little bit of everything?
Well, I did a little bit of everything. I had a tent for myself and to sleep in, and I helped in a variety of ways in the activities we were involved with.
When you did have your uniform and you were with your men, how much weight was on you? Because I've seen those before and they seem to be very heavy.
Well, not much different than I am today. I'm trying to get back up to 150. I'm 145. So, but I was a little bit heavier than that when I was overseas.
I mean, for your uniform, how heavy was what you were wearing? Or your uniform.
My uniform?
Yeah, how heavy was it?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know how much the uniform was. It wasn't bad. During summer months, it's fairly warm, and so you have fairly light clothes.
And when you were at the DMZ and you were still a second lieutenant, before
I was first lieutenant when I got before I left to go home.
Oh, you were?
I learned it while I was in Korea.
So the whole time you were in Korea, you were a first lieutenant? The entire time you were in Korea?
About a year. Maybe a little less than that.
And could you take me through what you would do when you were working with the artillery?
I'm sorry?
What did you do when you were working with the artillery?
Well, the artillery was right there where I lived. I was right there with them. At first, I was an observer way up in the front, but then I was reassigned back down to the unit itself, to a battalion, and I got a battery. So I had a battery and 45 men for those guns.
Was it more dangerous being an observer?
No, it was more dangerous up in the front.
And I believe that's how you said you lost your hearing, right?
No, I lost my hearing back where the big guns were. So that my hearing wasn't as good after standing next to a big gun that's shooting a 100-pound ship 8 miles. And the noise is pretty loud on this side. This side is worse than this side is. Because the gun was right there.
You were really that close to it?
Well, probably as far as that wall.
And when you did have the opportunity to move around, I know you were probably in close quarters, correct? How long were you?
No, where the gun was?
Yeah.
Oh, that was the valley, the nice valley. The men were up on the top of the next hill that goes up. They had a great big tent that they used, and so the 45 men lived up there, and I had a small tent up there, and here were the guns, and here was another big hill, and the enemy was out that way, and they were about 4 miles away.
Only 4 miles.
Yeah, well, that's as far. We can't fire too far.
And for the guns that you were using, do you remember what types they were?
Yes.
What were they?
155 howitzers. 155 howitzers.
How big were they?
The shell was about 12 inches long and about 8 or 9 inches across. It was a heavy. Well, it was separately loaded by putting the shell in first and then putting bags of atomic material after that.
Did your background in chemistry help you when you were trying to operate those machines?
No, I don't think there's much connection.
No?
No, no.
Well, when you first saw them and before you had used them, was it scary at all?
Was it what?
Was it scary before you had actually gotten experience using those weapons?
Well, I don't think scary was the word. Loud is just the word. But I don't think scary. The Army is very well controlled.
So it was very disciplined in your experience.
Just making sure that each one knew what his job was and did the job.
Did you ever get injured while you were over there?
What?
Did you ever have an injury?
Any?
An injury? Were you hurt or wounded?
No, I don't believe I did. I don't recall any.
Do you remember? Do you know anyone who did?
No, I don't recall. Not back in the battery. No.
So it was fairly lucky then.
Well, because there was no enemy there, so there was nobody hurt at all for any reason at all. They were very careful.
Did you ever have any malfunctions, like with the
Any what?
a malfunction or an issue with the artillery or the weapons?
No, I
you
had no
used?
problems.
And did you ever have any sort of practice with those, or did the practice that you do mostly consist
We
of
didn't
training?
practice with the artillery there. The artillery practiced when you were back in the United States. We did practice back here. Different kinds of weapons, but the approach was the same.
What other weapons did you use?
Oh, I think 105s, which are a smaller version of what we had over there. We had a much bigger gun, and so shorter distances, lighter weight, easier to handle.
And were you ever using them, or you said that you were usually
No,
in
the
close
war was
proximity?
over. Oh, in Korea?
Yes.
Well, we never fired because the war was over. When I got there, the war was over.
Did you know that when you landed?
Well, the war ended in July, and I got there in September, so it was over by the time I got there. The war.
How did you get over there?
I was sent by a bus from where I lived in Oklahoma up to the ocean. I flew to Hawaii, and I took a boat from Hawaii to Japan, and I took a railroad down the coast of Japan, and then a boat across to Korea, and then a truck up to the front.
How long did that whole trip take?
Oh gosh, it was several weeks, I think, because you got to get tested all the way along.
Like for what? Like physical tests?
No, just checked on your assignment being all taken care of and everything else, paperwork.
Oh.
So, nothing else. And you got to your unit, and then everything was fine.
Had you ever left the country before?
Yes, I think I sure had, because I had relatives in other places around the world.
So it was
I had responsibilities in Japan. I had responsibilities in the business that I was in Japan, and I had Mexico, and I had them. And I worked for a Dutch company.
And when you actually did spend time in Korea, what was your impression of it at the time?
Well, my impression of
Korea, of being there?
Well, Korea was a pretty pretty well damaged country in many respects. The war had been going on and gotten all the way down to nearly to the bottom of Korea. The 38th parallel was the difference between the people who lived in the northern parallel of the 38th and those who lived in the south part of that, with a long, thin island that came from China. And so those people were quite different, and the war started between the two of them.
So the landscape was more desolate? It was a desolate landscape?
I still didn't get the question.
It was it did not look good when you were there, right? Because it was
No,
still
well,
recovering.
they had actually broken up the country into two parts, and those two parts of the country were fighting over the ownership of the property. And so they put it back to the 38th parallel, and both parties calmed down. And that's what the end of it. The UN, I think, was in part helpful in that.
And when you were actually still living in the tents, you never had a time where you were sick or ill other than...
That I was what?
Did you ever get sick or were you ill?
No, I don't recall. Maybe a cold or something, but nothing very serious.
So then other than your hearing, you don't have any other permanent damage that happened from being...
No, I'm fine.
And if you could go back and you could maybe change something or do something else, what would you have done?
Well, it was really very simple Army rules, and so there's nothing much to change. Everything else went that way. I was an officer, and I did as I was told. And that's how things were.
How many other people were above you in rank at the time?
Oh my gosh, quite a bit. Caught up to generals. So I was way down the front. Second lieutenant is the bottom of the officers, you know.
But you were a first lieutenant in Korea.
Well, I got a first lieutenant before I left, yes.
Yes, okay. And for the training that you did with men, did you ever have any lasting friendships from that?
Any what?
Lasting friendships from the men you trained with?
No, I got along with the men just fine.
Did you still talk to them after you left Korea, after you were out of the service?
Did I ever see them or so?
Yeah.
No, I didn't, because we all went off to different parts of the country and we didn't know each other. So we got to know each other over there, but that's all.
And when you were actually serving, did anything ever really scare you? Did anything happen out of the ordinary?
Well, it's you take respect of where you are, so you don't take that too lightly. But I think other than that, it was quite calm.
And being there after the war, you felt more secure?
Well, so the Korean War was a relatively short war, and so it didn't have a lot of history in it, and I think that was a very good thing, really, worked out.
And are you glad that you had the opportunity to experience that?
Yes, I think so, because it was very good training on being in the Army. So.
Would you have ever considered staying in the Army?
What, consider?
Staying in the Army?
You know, I wanted to go back and get into a domestic business. I had an undergraduate 4 years in chemistry, and I wanted to go use that to have new opportunities.
Did you ever have any other experience after that, serving for the
With the
military?
Army?
No.
No, nothing. No. That was the end of my life. 2 years.
In only 2 years, did it change any part of your life significantly?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
It's so interesting to see how different it is now compared to then. But how did you feel about the conflict at the time? Did you have an opinion on it? I know you were very young.
On the war?
Yeah.
No, I was in the Army doing as the Army told me.
How old were you exactly?
I would be about 22 years old, 22, 23.
And how old were the other men that you were with?
Most of them were younger than I was.
Really?
Yeah, quite a few of them were. So there's some older men, but not very many.
Was that difficult at all?
Pardon?
Was it difficult at all to have so many almost children, like very, very young boys?
Well, not young boys. They had to be, I've forgotten the actual amounts, but I would guess it's probably about 18 years old. And I was up in my 20s.
Did any of them seem scared?
Did it what?
Did any of the younger men seem scared?
Oh, they felt fine over there. I mean, we were living in the outdoors, and so in the middle of nowhere. But other than that, it was a fine place to be.
And did you feel like it was your duty or your obligation to be there before you had decided to go to ROTC?
I'm a member of the United States, and that's part of my responsibility.
So you didn't have any doubts or second thoughts about it?
No. That's part of being an American.
How did your wife feel about it?
Oh, she was glad to have me home because we'd been married only a short time before I left. And so she was glad to see me home, and I was glad to see her. We had a wonderful life together.
How long had you been married before you went to?
Oh, about a year, I think it was.
Wow.
A year or two.
And with your experiences there, I know that you were able to come home and reacclimate to life, but did you ever, other than not seeing anybody, did you ever take anything else with you, like any physical souvenirs, or do you have any souvenirs from overseas?
No, I never needed to go back there. Is that what your question is?
Yeah. Like, did you bring anything back with you from?
No, nothing. No contacts. No, nothing. Because all the army was all disbanded, and they were all gone.
And when you were serving, other than your day-to-day experiences, nothing else happened out of the norm? It was very scheduled?
That was ordinary, very, very scheduled, yes. But we did everything on a very scheduled basis.
And I know you described the landscape like with hills. You had hills on each side of the artillery?
On the side of what?
When you described the landscape, you said there you were in between hills.
Between hills, yes.
Hills.
Oh, yeah, hills, yes. We were down behind a hill. We fired over that hill.
Oh, you fired over the hill.
Yeah. The hill wasn't very high. Just rolling hills, and we were down in the valley. That's all. So,
And did you ever use that for training, like running up hills?
no, we didn't fire the guns when I was there because the war was over. So we didn't do anything.
I mean, for like your physical training for your day-to-day activities.
Oh yeah, we used the fact that you had to go through the technical aspects of it, and get the calls from the front and go through that process. But that's all we used, and so all the calculations were done.
And did you ever do anything like play cards or other than write letters or?
I don't remember any. There might have been some. I don't know.
But you did have a good relationship with the men that you worked with.
Yeah, I did. They're good men.
And you said that they were mostly younger, but with you being slightly older, do you think that gave you more opportunity for advancement, or do you think you were more prepared?
No, I didn't get any opportunities in that way.
Did
No.
you feel more prepared at all because you were a little bit older than them?
Did I what?
Did you feel a little bit more prepared?
Was I prepared?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had good training in the Army, and so I used that, and I got along fine.
When you were still in the ROTC program, when you were getting your degree, what did you do for training?
What?
When you were in the ROTC program,
Yeah.
what did you do to train at that time?
Oh golly, that was mostly questions of what you do in case of an army in need or in a fight, and so all the things and who did what part and how it was organized and what different kinds of opportunities there were. So I don't recall anything more specific than that. It wasn't very, very great because everybody had their training.
Were you surprised when you found out that you actually would be going overseas? Did you think that it would be necessary? Did you think it was going to be your job?
I think it was what?
Were you expecting to find out that you had to go overseas, that it was your time to go?
Well, yeah, I went through the training at Fort Sill, and that was artillery training, and that was to send me overseas. So when that was finished, it was 4 months at Fort Sill. I got on the travel and went to Korea.
So if your training at Fort Sill was 4 months, was that your only training you had previously?
Only training in artillery, yes. So, but I had a lot of training in managing opportunities with people and getting along with the rules in the Army and doing that to make sure things were done correctly.
And what other artillery did you work with, other than the heavy?
Well, I worked with the ones at Fort Sill. That was training artillery. And then I had 12th Field Artillery and when I got to Korea. Baker Battery of 12th Field. So we had big guns.
And for your artillery training when you were still in Fort Sill, did you have any experiences there that were out of the ordinary, or anything happened when you were in your training?
Any training with artillery?
Yeah.
Not outside the fort. The fort had artillery training.
How many other men were you with?
Oh my gosh, I don't know, hundreds.
Hundreds.
That's for training for artillery. That's a main place for artillery training. That's Fort Sill.
And you didn't go to any other forts for training? You just went right from Fort Sill to...
Well, I had the training that I had during college at the time with the Fort Sill training, but I also had the Army training that I had, and so that was both good.
Well, my turn now. Well, in closing, this has been an interview of John C. Jadel regarding his service during the Korean War. My name is Carolyn Miller. The time is 7:00 p.m. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you.